What happens when a federal surveyor radios in coordinates that don't exist, and then vanishes from the center of his own perfectly arranged equipment? On September 23, 2023, Marcus Chen hiked into Georgia's Robin County backcountry with a classified work order and $15,000 worth of precision instruments. His final transmission came at 2:47 p.m. I'm getting anomalous elevation readings here. My GPS shows coordinates that don't match anything on my reference maps. Then, static. When search teams reached his last known position the next morning, they found his equipment arranged in a perfect geometric triangle, measuring rods placed at exact 60-degree angles around a central GPS unit. His field notebook lay open to calculations describing gravitational inconsistencies impossible in stable terrain. Of Marcus Chen, there was no trace. No footprints, no struggle, nothing. Just the methodical arrangement that locals recognized immediately, because they'd seen it before, with every surveyor who had tried to map this land for the past 70 years. On the morning of September 23, 2023, federal land surveyor Marcus Chen shouldered his GPS equipment and headed into the Robin County backcountry near Warwoman Dell, Georgia. The 34-year-old topographer had been assigned what his supervisor called a routine boundary revision, the kind of precise mapping work that Chen had performed dozens of times across the southeastern United States. But there was nothing routine about this particular assignment. The work order, marked with federal security classifications Chen had rarely seen, requested an exact survey of a 640-acre parcel deep in the southern Appalachian Mountains. The land sat at the intersection of federal forest, private holdings, and what appeared on some maps as disputed Cherokee territory. Chen's final radio check came at 2:47 p.m. that Saturday afternoon. His voice, recorded by the Rabun County Emergency Dispatch, carried an unusual tension. "Base, this is Survey 1, Chen reported. "I'm getting anomalous elevation readings here. My GPS shows I'm at coordinates that don't match anything on my reference maps. The elevation markers are jumping around like crazy." Dispatcher Maria Santos asked for clarification, but received only static in response. Multiple attempts to re-establish contact over the next hour failed completely. By evening, Chen's wife had contacted the sheriff's office to report him overdue. The search began at first light on Sunday. Rabun County Sheriff's deputies, accompanied by US Forest Service rangers, followed Chen's planned route into the mountainous terrain. Dense stands of white oak and tulip poplar limited visibility, while steep granite outcroppings made travel treacherous for the search teams. What they discovered at coordinates 34.7891 degree, 83.4 on 56 degree. W defied explanation. Chen's expensive surveying equipment, a $15,000 GPS unit, precision measuring tools, and mapping software lay arranged in perfect geometric patterns across a small clearing. The GPS device sat at the exact center of what appeared to be a carefully constructed triangle, with measuring rods placed at precise 60-degree angles around the perimeter. Deputy Tom Bradley, who discovered the scene, later described it as methodical, almost ritualistic. The equipment showed no signs of damage or struggle. Chen's field notebook lay open to a page covered with coordinate calculations, but the handwriting became increasingly erratic toward the bottom. His final entries described gravitational inconsistencies and elevation variances impossible in stable terrain. Of Marcus Chen himself, there was no trace. No footprints led away from the clearing. No clothing or personal items were scattered about. His vehicle remained locked and undisturbed at the forest access road 3 miles away. It was as if he had simply vanished from the center of his own precisely arranged equipment. The GPS unit, when examined by investigators, revealed data that challenged basic understanding of the local geography. According to its readings, the elevation at Chen's location varied by more than 300 feet within a 50-yard radius, and possible variations that suggested the ground itself was somehow shifting beneath the instruments. As news of the disappearance spread through Robin County's tight-knit community, questions multiplied. Why had the federal government ordered such detailed boundary surveys in this remote area? What could cause expensive GPS equipment to malfunction so dramatically? And most troubling of all, what had happened to Marcus Chen in those final hours before his radio went silent? The answers, it would soon become clear, lay buried somewhere in the complex history of this particular piece of Appalachian land, a history that some locals insisted should never be fully mapped or understood. Ruby Mae Dockery had lived on Panther Creek Ridge for 78 years, and in all that time, she insisted, the government men had never gotten the boundaries right. From her front porch, which commanded a sweeping view of the valley where Marcus Chen had vanished, she could point to landmarks that appeared on no federal map. That hollow there, she told Sheriff's Deputy Bradley on September 25th, gesturing toward a tree-lined depression barely visible through the morning mist. My great-great-grandfather called it Devil's Pocket. But you won't find that name on any of your fancy surveys. Government's been trying to measure this land for going on 70 years, and they never get it right. Ruby Mae's family had settled the area in 1847, 2 decades before the Cherokee removal reached its final phase in North Georgia. Her ancestors, Scots-Irish immigrants seeking isolation in the mountain hollows, had established homesteads through what she called handshake agreements with Cherokee families, who considered the land too sacred for permanent settlement. The Cherokee knew better than to try to own this ground, Ruby Mae explained, her weathered hands tracing patterns in the air as she spoke. They'd hunt through here, gather plants, hold ceremonies in certain spots. But they never tried to fence it or mark permanent boundaries. Said some land belongs to itself, not to people. Her family's hand-drawn property map, carefully preserved in an oiled leather portfolio, revealed geographical features that existed nowhere in official records. Springs that ran uphill, ridges that appeared on some aerial photographs but not others. Hollows that seemed to change depth depending on the season. According to Ruby Mae, these irregularities had confounded surveyors since the federal government first attempted comprehensive mapping in the 1950s. I've seen at least a dozen government men come through here over the decades, she recalled, settling into a rocking chair made from local chestnut wood. They all carry the same kind of fancy equipment, take the same kind of notes, and they all end up confused or scared or gone. When pressed for details about previous disappearances, Ruby Mae became more cautious. She acknowledged that some folks who came to measure the land never made it back to their trucks, but insisted that the mountains themselves were responsible, not human agency. This land has its own opinions about being surveyed, she said. Always has. My grandmother used to tell stories about Cherokee medicine men who said certain places should stay unmapped, untitled, unnowned. Maybe they knew something we don't. Ruby Mae's property records, some dating to the 1890s, painted a complex picture of ownership disputes that had never been fully resolved. According to her documents, the federal government had attempted to purchase portions of the family land multiple times, each effort abandoned when surveys failed to establish clear boundaries. They offered my daddy good money back in 1962, she remembered. Said they needed the land for some kind of federal project, but when their surveyors couldn't agree on where our property lines actually were, the whole deal fell through. Same thing happened again in the 80s, and once more in the 90s. Every time, it's the same problem. The land won't be measured. The Cherokee connection intrigued investigators, particularly Deputy Bradley, whose grandmother had been part Cherokee. Ruby Mae confirmed that several families in the area retained complex relationships with Cherokee Nation representatives, despite the official removal having occurred more than 150 years earlier. Joseph Ridge, he's some kind of boundary specialist for the Cherokee Nation. Comes through here every few years, she revealed. Always asking questions about old treaties, old agreements, old promises that were never kept. Last time I saw him was maybe 6 months ago. He seemed particularly interested in that same area where your missing surveyor was working. Ruby Mae's most troubling revelation came as the interview concluded. When shown photographs of Marcus Chen's equipment arranged in geometric patterns, she nodded with recognition rather than surprise. "That's exactly how they always leave things," she said quietly. "The ones who don't come back. Their equipment ends up arranged just like that. All neat and precise. Like they were trying to solve some kind of puzzle right up until the end. My grandmother called it the land signature. Its way of saying it's finished with whoever was trying to measure it. As Deputy Bradley prepared to leave, Ruby May offered one final observation that would haunt the investigation. "You know what's strange about all these government surveys over the years? They're always asking the same questions, measuring the same boundaries, trying to establish the same property lines. Like they keep forgetting what happened to the last fellows who tried." No. The implication hung in the mountain air like fog. Perhaps the land's resistance to mapping was more systematic, more purposeful than anyone had previously understood. As Deputy Bradley drove back down the winding mountain road, Ruby May's words echoed in his mind. Some land belongs to itself, but what happened to those who tried to claim it anyway? Joseph Ridge arrived in Rabun County on September 28th, driving in a dust-covered Cherokee Nation vehicle down the same mountain roads that Marcus Chen had traveled 5 days earlier. As a boundary specialist for the Cherokee Nation's Historical Preservation Office, Ridge had spent the better part of 2 decades investigating territorial disputes across the southeastern United States. But the disappearance of a federal surveyor in an area of particular historical sensitivity demanded immediate attention. According to Ridge, the coordinates where Chen vanished sat at the heart of a boundary dispute that had never been properly resolved. A legal and territorial puzzle dating back to the Treaty of New Echota in 1835. This specific parcel was never formally ceded to the United States, Ridge explained to sheriff's deputies during a briefing at the Rabun County Courthouse. The treaty language is ambiguous, and subsequent surveys have consistently failed to establish clear boundaries. From a Cherokee Nation perspective, this land remains under disputed ownership. Ridge's research painted a complex picture of overlapping territorial claims. The 640 acres that Chen had been surveying fell into what legal scholars called a jurisdictional gap, land claimed simultaneously by federal authorities, private owners like the Dockery family, and the Cherokee Nation based on treaty interpretations that had never been legally resolved. In 1838, when Cherokee families were forcibly removed from this area, some managed to hide in the most remote hollows, Ridge continued. They maintained traditional relationships with the land even after official removal. Those relationships, according to Cherokee law, never ended. The land remained Cherokee land regardless of what federal authorities claimed. The timing of Chen's survey assignment raised additional questions. According to Ridge's sources within the Cherokee Nation, federal interest in this particular boundary had increased dramatically over the past 18 months. Multiple requests for historical documents, treaty interpretations, and traditional Cherokee names for geographical features suggested a comprehensive review of territorial claims. Someone in the federal government wanted definitive answers about ownership and jurisdiction, Ridge noted. That kind of detailed boundary work usually precedes major land use decisions, facility construction, resource extraction, or territorial transfers. The Cherokee Nation requested consultation on any such decisions, but our requests were denied. Ridge's examination of Chen's GPS data revealed patterns that aligned with Cherokee traditional geography in unexpected ways. The anomalous elevation readings that Chen had reported in his final radio transmission corresponded almost exactly to locations that Cherokee oral tradition described as spirit thresholds, places where the physical and spiritual worlds intersected. Cherokee geography isn't just about physical features, Ridge explained. It includes spiritual topology, ceremonial spaces, and areas considered too sacred for ordinary human activity. Some places were never meant to be mapped using Western surveying methods. They exist in relationship to spiritual rather than physical coordinates. The arrangement of Chen's equipment in geometric patterns particularly intrigued Ridge. According to Cherokee traditional knowledge, such patterns often appeared when Western mapping techniques encountered spaces that existed primarily in spiritual rather than physical dimensions. It's as if the land itself was trying to communicate through Chen's instruments, Ridge suggested. The precise geometric arrangements aren't random. They represent traditional Cherokee concepts of balance, relationship, and territorial respect. Perhaps Chen unconsciously arranged his equipment according to patterns the land was showing him. Ridge's investigation uncovered documentation of at least 3 previous surveying expeditions in the same area since 1952. Each expedition had encountered similar technical difficulties: GPS malfunctions, elevation irregularities, and communication failures. Each had resulted in incomplete surveys, and in 2 cases, personnel who were never found. There's a pattern here that goes beyond simple equipment failure or human error, Ridge concluded. This land has consistently resisted federal mapping attempts for more than 70 years. From a Cherokee perspective, that resistance makes perfect sense. Some territories maintain their own sovereignty, regardless of human legal documents. The Cherokee Nation's position created additional complications for investigators. If Ridge's interpretation was correct, then Chen had disappeared while conducting unauthorized surveys on disputed Cherokee territory. Federal authorities would need Cherokee Nation permission to continue search efforts, but such permission would require acknowledging Cherokee territorial claims that federal authorities had consistently denied. "It's a jurisdictional nightmare," admitted Sheriff Tom Caldwell. "Multiple agencies claiming authority over the same piece of land, each with different legal interpretations of territorial boundaries. And somewhere in the middle of all that complexity, we have a missing surveyor and a lot of unanswered questions." Ridge's final observation would prove particularly troubling for investigators. In Cherokee tradition, land that protects itself from mapping usually has good reasons for maintaining its secrecy. Perhaps the question isn't what happened to Marcus Chen, but what was Marcus Chen about to discover that someone, or something, didn't want mapped? As Ridge prepared his formal report to the Cherokee Nation, one thing became clear. Chen's disappearance had opened legal and territorial questions that extended far beyond a simple missing person case. The surveyor had vanished at the intersection of 3 different concepts of land ownership, and perhaps the land itself had opinions about which concept should prevail. Dr. Sarah Kim, from the Georgia Institute of Technology, arrived in Robin County on October 2nd, with a team of graduate students and $50,000 worth of precision measuring equipment. As a specialist in gravitational anomalies and geological surveying, Dr. Kim had been contacted by federal authorities to investigate the technical impossibilities recorded in Marcus Chen's GPS data. What her team discovered challenged fundamental assumptions about the stability of the Appalachian mountain terrain. Using differential GPS units, gravimeters, and seismic monitoring equipment, Dr. Kim's team attempted to replicate Chen's survey work in the exact location where his equipment had been found. "The readings we're getting are unprecedented in stable mountain terrain," Dr. Kim reported to investigators on October 4th. "Within a 50-yard radius, our instruments are recording elevation variations of more than 300 feet. That kind of variation would typically indicate massive underground caverns, active tectonic movement, or significant subsidence. But geological surveys confirm that the bedrock here is solid granite, with no caverns or unstable formations." The technical mysteries multiplied as Dr. Kim's team expanded their investigation. GPS units from 3 different manufacturers all malfunctioned in the same specific coordinates, displaying elevation readings that fluctuated wildly every few minutes. Gravitational measurements suggested localized gravitational anomalies that had no known geological explanation. "It's as if the basic laws of physics operate differently in this particular location," Dr. Kim noted in her preliminary report. "Our gravimeters are detecting gravitational variations that would require massive underground mass displacements. But ground-penetrating radar shows nothing unusual in the subsurface geology." Most troubling were the temporal variations in the anomalous readings. Dr. Kim's instruments recorded the most extreme irregularities during specific times of day, particularly around 2:47 p.m., the exact time that Marcus Chen had made his final radio transmission. "There's a pattern to the anomalies that suggests they're not random equipment malfunctions," Dr. Kim explained. "The gravitational and elevation irregularities peak at consistent intervals, almost as if they're responding to some kind of schedule or cycle. That's not how geological phenomena typically behave. Chen's field notebook, when examined by Dr. Kim's team, revealed increasingly sophisticated attempts to measure and understand the anomalies he was encountering. His final entries included hand-drawn diagrams of gravitational field variations and calculations suggesting that he was trying to map three-dimensional space that somehow contained more volume than its physical boundaries should allow. Chen was a skilled surveyor, Dr. Kim observed. His notes show that he recognized these readings as impossible, but he kept trying to measure and document them systematically. His final calculations suggest he was attempting to map space that was somehow folded or compressed in ways that standard surveying techniques couldn't handle. The geometric arrangement of Chen's equipment took on new significance when analyzed as a potential response to the gravitational anomalies. Dr. Kim's team discovered that the precise positioning of Chen's instruments created a configuration that minimized the gravitational distortions, almost as if Chen had been trying to find stable measurement points within a zone of spatial instability. The equipment wasn't abandoned randomly, Dr. Kim concluded. It was positioned with mathematical precision to create a stable reference frame within an area of extreme spatial distortion. Chen was apparently trying to solve the measurement problem right up until he disappeared. Dr. Kim's team also documented unusual effects on electronic equipment beyond GPS and measurement devices. Digital cameras experienced timestamp irregularities. Cell phones lost signal even in areas with normally strong coverage. Compass readings fluctuated unpredictably, sometimes pointing to magnetic north, sometimes to entirely different directions. We're dealing with some kind of localized phenomenon that affects multiple types of measurement and communication equipment, Dr. Kim reported. It's not just gravitational or magnetic. It's as if the fundamental constants of physics, gravity, magnetism, maybe even time, operate differently within this specific geographical area. The most unsettling discovery came when Dr. Kim's team attempted to establish a continuous monitoring station at the coordinates where Chen had vanished. Equipment left overnight was consistently found rearranged by morning, repositioned in geometric patterns similar to those found with Chen's instruments. We've eliminated human interference, Dr. Kim noted. Motion-activated cameras show no human activity, and the area is too remote for casual interference. Yet our instruments are being systematically repositioned by some unknown agency. The arrangements always follow the same mathematical principles, precise geometric relationships that minimize spatial distortion. Federal authorities classified Dr. Kim's complete findings, but her preliminary conclusion suggested possibilities that challenged conventional understanding of physical reality. Either the Appalachian Mountains contain geological phenomena unknown to science, or the location where Marcus Chen disappeared operated according to physical laws that mainstream physics couldn't explain. From a purely scientific perspective, Dr. Kim admitted in her final interview with investigators, we're looking at measurements that shouldn't be possible in stable terrain. The question isn't just what happened to Marcus Chen. The question is what's happening to the fundamental structure of space and time in that particular location, and whether Chen's disappearance is connected to those spatial anomalies. As Dr. Kim's team packed their equipment and prepared to leave Rabon County, one troubling question remained unanswered. If the gravitational and spatial anomalies were real, then Marcus Chen hadn't simply vanished. He might have encountered something far more complex and dangerous than anyone had previously imagined. The data suggested that Chen had been trying to map territory that existed in more dimensions than standard surveying techniques could measure. Whether he succeeded in that impossible task, or whether the attempt itself had somehow caused his disappearance, remained one of the investigation's deepest mysteries. On the morning of October 8th, 15 days after Marcus Chen's disappearance, everything changed. Sheriff Tom Caldwell was reviewing search grid maps when two black SUVs pulled into the Rabun County Sheriff's Department parking lot. The federal agents who emerged wore unmarked windbreakers and carried credentials from the Department of Homeland Security. Agent Patricia Voss, a stern woman in her 40s with close-cropped gray hair, introduced herself and her partner, Agent Daniel Reeves. Within minutes, the Chen investigation became a federal matter. This is now classified as a national security issue, Agent Voss informed Sheriff Caldwell. We'll be establishing a restricted perimeter around the search area. All civilian search efforts are to cease immediately. When Caldwell protested, citing ongoing volunteer operations, Voss was firm. Sheriff, I need you to understand that Mr. Chen wasn't just any surveyor. His work here involved sensitive federal interests. By noon, orange barrier tape and federal warning signs cordoned off a 2-mile radius around Chen's last known location. Volunteer search teams were turned away at newly established checkpoints. Ruby Mae Dockery watched from her front porch as helicopters circled overhead, their rotors churning the autumn air. That afternoon, Chen's supervisor from the U.S. Geological Survey, Dr. James Morrison, arrived from Atlanta. In a closed-door meeting with federal agents and county officials, Morrison revealed details that had been withheld from the initial search efforts. Marcus was conducting what we call a strategic boundary analysis, Morrison explained, according to notes later obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request. The federal government has been considering this area for a sensitive facility. His survey work was preliminary assessment for potential acquisition. The nature of the proposed facility remained classified, but Morrison's admission shed new light on Chen's presence in the remote Appalachian Hollow. This wasn't routine boundary maintenance. It was intelligence gathering for federal expansion. Local residents began reporting unusual activity they'd previously dismissed. Martha Williams, who lived 3 miles south of the restricted area, recalled seeing unmarked vehicles on Forest Service roads throughout the summer. Government plates, but not Forest Service trucks, she told her neighbor. They disappear up those old login roads and sometimes not come back until after dark. Hank Dockery, Ruby Mae's son, remembered encounters with men in khaki clothing, asking questions about property boundaries and mineral rights. They said they were doing environmental assessments, Dockery later told investigators. But they seemed mighty interested in who owned what, and whether any of the old land patents were still valid. The federal presence intensified when Agent Voss announced that Chen's work had uncovered irregularities in historical land records. She wouldn't elaborate, but her statement suggested Chen had discovered something significant before his disappearance. Dr. Morrison privately acknowledged to Sheriff Caldwell that Chen had been specifically chosen for this assignment due to his top-secret security clearance, a detail that raised uncomfortable questions. Why would a routine boundary survey require such high-level security clearance? What had the federal government expected Chen to find? Joseph Ridge, the Cherokee Nation boundary specialist, found himself excluded from the expanded investigation. They're treating this like a terrorism case, Ridge observed to reporters. But Marcus Chen was investigating land that's been disputed since the Treaty of New Echota. Maybe he found something that challenges federal ownership claims. By evening, the restricted area had been expanded to include portions of Ruby Mae Dockery's property. Federal agents informed her that she couldn't return to certain areas of her land until further notice. The 78-year-old mountain woman refused to be intimidated. "This is my land," she told Agent Voss firmly. "My great-great-grandfather cleared these woods. You can put up all the tape you want, but I'm staying put." The standoff highlighted growing tensions between federal authority and local residents who viewed the government response as excessive. What had begun as a missing person case now resembled a military operation, complete with restricted airspace and communication blackouts. Agent Voss's final statement to local media raised more questions than it answered. Mr. Chen's survey work revealed information that affects national security interests. We cannot discuss the specifics, but the federal government has legitimate concerns about unauthorized access to this area. You see, Sheriff Caldwell found himself caught between federal demands and local concerns. They won't tell us what Chen found, but they're treating this mountain hollow like it's Fort Knox, he confided to Deputy Bradley. Makes you wonder what's so important about a piece of land that nobody's been able to survey properly for 70 years. As darkness fell on October 8th, the mountains of Rabun County settled into an uneasy quiet. Somewhere within the restricted zone, Marcus Chen's fate remained unknown. But his disappearance had triggered a federal response that suggested his final discoveries were far more significant than anyone had initially realized. The question now wasn't just what had happened to Marcus Chen. It was what he had found that the federal government was so determined to protect, and whether that discovery was connected to the same forces that had been claiming surveyors in these mountains for more than 70 years. While federal agents maintained their security perimeter, investigative reporter Sarah Kemp began digging into historical records at the Rabun County Courthouse. What she discovered would transform the Chen case from an isolated incident into something far more troubling. In the basement archives, dusty filing cabinets held decades of missing person reports, property disputes, and surveyor records. Kemp's methodical search revealed a pattern that had been invisible to individual investigations, but became unmistakable when viewed across time. Harold Hab Jennings had disappeared on March 22, 1952. A federal land surveyor working for the newly created National Forest Service, Jennings had been establishing boundary markers between private holdings and proposed federal acquisitions. His field notes, preserved in Forest Service records, documented unusual magnetic variations and inconsistent elevation measurements in the same general area where Chen would vanish 71 years later. Jennings' abandoned survey equipment had been found arranged in precise geometric patterns, theodolite measuring chains and compass, positioned at exact 60-degree angles around a central point. Local search parties had initially assumed bears or weather had scattered the equipment, but photographs from the Forest Service file showed the arrangement was too deliberate to be natural. The second case emerged from Cherokee Nation archives that Joseph Ridge accessed through tribal genealogy records. Thomas Wildcat Ridge, Joseph's own great-uncle, had been conducting an independent boundary survey in 1978, attempting to establish Cherokee treaty rights to disputed territory. Thomas Ridge was an experienced surveyor who had worked on reservation boundary projects across the Southeast. On September 14, 1978, Thomas Ridge radioed his base camp to report elevation discrepancies that don't match federal topographic maps. His final transmission mentioned finding evidence of survey errors dating back to the 1830s removal period. Ridge's survey truck was found 3 days later, with all equipment carefully arranged in a perfect triangle around the vehicle. Thomas Ridge himself was never seen again. Most disturbing was the third case, discovered in Georgia Bureau of Investigation cold case files. Dr. Elizabeth Crane, a university geologist conducting mineral surveys for the state in 1994, had disappeared while investigating gravitational anomalies reported by previous surveyors. Crane's graduate student, who had remained at base camp, reported her final radio contact described impossible readings from sensitive gravitational measurement equipment. Dr. Crane's instruments were recovered in a perfect circle, each device positioned exactly 12 feet from a central point marked by a small cairn of local stones. Her field notes, partially legible despite weather damage, referenced measurement failures at specific coordinates and possible subsurface mass variations. Sarah Kemp's investigation revealed additional disturbing details. Each disappearance had occurred during attempts to establish definitive property boundaries in areas with complex ownership histories. Each involved experienced professionals using sophisticated measuring equipment. Each resulted in the discovery of carefully arranged instruments, but no trace of the missing person. Ruby Mae Dockery wasn't surprised by these revelations. When Kemp interviewed her at her kitchen table, federal agents having finally allowed controlled access to her property, the mountain woman nodded knowingly. "Mama told me about the surveyor man who came through when she was little," Ruby Mae recalled, her weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug. "That would have been 1920s, maybe 1930s. He was measuring for the government, trying to figure out where Cherokee land ended and white man's land began. Mama said he stayed at our place one night, all excited about some discovery he'd made." Ruby Mae's voice grew quieter. "Next morning, they found his equipment laid out neat as you please, but he was gone. Mama said the old Cherokee woman who lived up the ridge just shook her head. Said some boundaries ain't meant to be drawn. Joseph Ridge had been conducting his own research into tribal oral histories. Elder Mary Bushyhead, keeper of Cherokee territorial knowledge, shared stories that aligned eerily with the documented disappearances. The old ones spoke of places where the earth itself resisted measurement, Ridge explained to investigators. territories that existed in the spaces between official maps. According to our oral tradition, these were places where the natural world and spirit world intersected. They were never meant to be owned by any government, Cherokee, colonial, or federal. Ridge's research suggested that the missing surveyors had all been working in areas that Cherokee tradition considered boundary-less, sacred territories that belonged neither to the Cherokee Nation nor to any settler government, but to the land itself. The pattern became even more compelling when Kemp discovered that federal interest in the area wasn't recent. Declassified documents from the 1950s revealed that the Atomic Energy Commission had investigated the region for potential uranium deposits. Cold War-era surveys had noted unusual geological formations and magnetic anomalies, but had been abandoned due to technical difficulties and personnel issues. By October 22, 2 weeks into the federal lockdown, the Chen case had evolved into something unprecedented. What appeared to be an isolated missing person incident was actually the latest chapter in a century-long pattern of disappearances linked to attempts at mapping unmappable territory. The question that haunted investigators was whether Marcus Chen had stumbled onto the same phenomenon that had claimed his predecessors, or whether someone or something was actively protecting this land from being surveyed, measured, and ultimately owned. As federal agents maintained their silent vigil over the restricted zone, the mountains of Rabun County held their secrets close, just as they had for nearly a century of missing surveyors. The pattern was clear, but the mechanism behind it remained as mysterious as the land itself. On November 3, 2023, after 26 days of intensive federal investigation, Agent Patricia Voss held a brief press conference in the parking lot of the Rabun County Sheriff's Department. Her statement was as notable for what it didn't reveal as for what it did. "The search for Marcus Chen has been suspended," Voss announced to a small gathering of local reporters and concerned residents. "The Department of Homeland Security has concluded its investigation into this matter. No evidence of foul play has been discovered. The case remains open but inactive." When pressed for details about Chen's fate or the reason for the extensive federal response, Voss declined to comment, citing ongoing security considerations. The restricted zone was lifted, orange barriers removed, and within 24 hours the federal presence had vanished as completely as Marcus Chen himself. What remained was a mystery that resisted conventional explanation. Sheriff Tom Caldwell found himself with a missing person case unlike any in his 25-year career. "We've got sophisticated equipment arranged in geometric patterns, GPS readings that don't match known geography. And now we know it's happened before," Caldwell told local news. "But we don't have a body. We don't have a crime scene. And we sure don't have answers." Ruby Mae Dockery returned to her normal routine, tending her small garden and maintaining her family's hand-drawn maps of the territory. When asked by investigators about her theory regarding the disappearances, her answer was consistent with mountain wisdom passed down through generations. "Some land doesn't want to be owned," she said simply. "No matter if you're Cherokee, federal government, or just some surveyor with fancy instruments. This hollow's been here longer than any of us, and it'll be here long after we're gone. Maybe it's got ways of protecting itself that we don't understand." Joseph Ridge offered a different perspective, grounded in Cherokee philosophy and territorial understanding. "In our traditional worldview, land isn't property to be measured and divided. It's a living entity with its own agency. What if these surveyors encountered something that challenges the entire Western concept of ownership and boundaries?" Ridge's theory suggested that Chen and his predecessors had discovered evidence of territorial claims that predated all modern legal frameworks, not just Cherokee treaties or federal acquisition, but relationships between human communities and the land itself that couldn't be captured in surveys or property deeds. "Marcus Chen was looking for coordinates that could be filed in a courthouse," Ridge explained. "But what if he found coordinates that exist in a different kind of reality altogether?" Investigative reporter Sarah Kemp had uncovered the historical pattern, but she struggled to explain the mechanism behind the disappearances. "We have 4 documented cases spanning more than 70 years, all involving the same type of professional conducting the same type of work in the same general area. That's not coincidence. But it's not conventional crime either. Nice. Kemp's final article, published in the Atlanta Constitution Journal, presented 3 theories without endorsing any of them. The first suggested a human agency, some individual or group that had been protecting this territory from official survey for decades, removing threats to their interests. But this theory failed to explain the arranged equipment or the consistent lack of evidence for violence. The second theory focused on natural phenomena, unusual geological formations, magnetic anomalies, or gravitational irregularities that could cause instrument failures, and possibly disorientation severe enough to cause experienced professionals to become fatally lost. But this couldn't account for the deliberate arrangement of abandoned equipment or the specific targeting of boundary surveyors. The third theory, which Kemp acknowledged was the most difficult to accept but also the hardest to dismiss, suggested that some territories might possess qualities that actively resist human attempts at measurement and ownership. Perhaps, Kemp wrote, there are places where the intersection of human ambition and natural law creates consequences we don't yet understand. Federal authorities never released Chen's final GPS data or the results of their 26-day investigation. Freedom of Information Act requests were denied on national security grounds. The proposed federal facility, whatever its intended purpose, was never mentioned again in public documents. Marcus Chen's personal effects were returned to his family in San Francisco. His widow, Dr. Linda Chen, visited Robin County once, in December 2023, hoping to understand her husband's fate. She walked the boundaries of the former restricted zone with Joseph Ridge and Ruby Mae Dockery, but found no answers that satisfied her grief. He was so careful, so precise, she told the 2 locals as winter wind moved through the bare hardwood trees. Marcus measured everything twice, checked every calculation. It doesn't make sense that he would just disappear. Ruby Mae took the younger woman's hand with weathered fingers. Honey, some things don't make sense in the way we want them to, but that doesn't mean they ain't true. Today, the hollow where Marcus Chen vanished looks much as it did before federal agents cordoned off the area. Mountain laurel grows thick along the creek banks. White oak and tulip poplar stand sentinel over narrow trails that wind through granite outcroppings. GPS devices still register unusual readings at specific coordinates, but no official surveys are planned. The Cherokee Nation maintains its territorial claims through legal channels, while acknowledging that some boundaries transcend courtroom proceedings. Ruby Mae Dockery continues to update her family's hand-drawn maps, adding details that appear on no federal survey. And somewhere in the southern Appalachian Highlands, in territory that may belong to no government and all governments, the mystery of the Midnight Cartographer remains unsolved. Marcus Chen's precise instruments recorded coordinates that led nowhere anyone could follow. Whether he found something beyond measurement, or something beyond measurement found him, remains one of Georgia's most perplexing unsolved mysteries. The land keeps its secrets, just as it always has. And perhaps, as Ruby Mae Dockery might say, that's exactly as it should be. If this case stays with you, you're not alone. Here at Unresolved America, we cover cases like this every single day. Stories that deserve to be remembered, questions that refuse to fade. If you want to keep these investigations alive, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. Drop a like if this story moved you, and leave a comment telling us which detail haunts you most. Until tomorrow, stay curious, stay vigilant, and never stop asking questions.